evening, everybody. Welcome to this ADI webinar. The theme for today is Design for Economic Resurgence. My name is Suresh Venkat. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. The discussion will last about 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. If you have any deep, dark questions, please send them on the Q&A screen. Try and avoid sending it on the chat screen, but if you can't, you can't. Let me first introduce our speakers. We have Ashwini Deshpande, co-founder, Elephant Design. Hi, Ashwini. We have Sonia Manchanda, founding partner, Spread Design and Innovation. Hi, Sonia.
Hi.
Biju Kurian, former CEO, Lifestyle and Reliance Retail and strategic partner with L. Catterton. Jacob Matthew, co-founder, Idiom Design and CEO at Industry Foundation. And we have Michael Foley joining us, president of ADI Bangalore. Before we start, Michael, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Hi, I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot of ADI. And it's an organization that's been growing, and it's about 800 members and over 8 chapters now. ADI provides great and it's basic sells as ADI at this point, and it's a time when we really need to be, as a design community, be completely together. So,
Michael, if you can hear us, your audio is a bit patchy. Maybe you should switch off your video and only use audio.
So, very interested in meeting with the. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Michael. Sorry, we couldn't hear a bit of what you said. We'll try and get the summary of what you said in a little while. So let's dive into the discussion. Biju, first question for you. So John Templeton, a financial wizard, once said that the 4 most dangerous words in business are this time it's different. My question to you is it different this time? Is the COVID lockdown different from what you've seen before?
Well, every situation is different. And I think if you were to compare it to major economic events, you probably compare it to maybe SARS 2002, you'd compare it to global financial crisis 2008-9, etc. So what you're seeing at this point of time is SARS was just a medical problem localized. It never really affected the rest of the world. If you look at the global financial crisis, it was an economic crisis emanating out of the mortgage crisis in the US. And then because the US has got its tentacles, financial tentacles in every part of the world, it then spread to the rest of the world. What you're seeing here is firstly, a major health crisis. And this has now affected 175 countries across the world. So it's pretty much no country is immune from the effects of COVID. Now, what we are going to see ahead of this is going to be a major economic crisis. Because what is happening in the health crisis is not that the numbers of people who are dying are so many compared to many of the other, epidemics that you might have. But this epidemic is translated to a pandemic because it's moving across the world. And when you look at the only way to be able to control it, which is in terms of, either finding a cure or finding a vaccine, what we are seeing here is that there is no cure at this point of time. Everybody's shooting in the dark. Somebody's using, anti-malarial drugs. Somebody else is using naturopathy, etc. So there is no cure and there is no vaccine as yet. And because there is no cure and there is no vaccine, people are afraid to be able to come out. And the only way which seems to stem the spread is by locking people down. So when you lock people down, then you're actually closing down countries, you're closing down companies, you're closing down industries. And when you do that, then you set off in motion an economic catastrophe. And what we are going to see after this will be the economic catastrophe. So if I were to go back to your question, Suresh, when you talk about it, it is different because what we are only seeing is the first part, which is a pandemic. And following this is going to be an economic catastrophe, unlike in most other cases where it was purely an economic catastrophe. That is why it's going to be different this time.
Biju, those are strong words. Economic catastrophe. Should we take those words to mean literally what they sound like?
Yeah, it should certainly mean. So what you're seeing as of now is a high level of unemployment in the US, which is probably one of the few countries where unemployment is measured in a fairly good way. And it's roughly about 20 million people who are currently unemployed, which is, roughly about 14 to 15% of the US workforce. The second part of what you're going to be seeing is that when companies close, the amount of money that the government has to be able to pay out to make sure that people have money in their wallets so that they can buy food is going to be catastrophic. So that is where you're going to be having a challenge. And we will see it in different forms in different countries, depending on the economic condition of that particular country. And we will certainly see a lot of it in India too.
All right, let's bring the audience in. We have about 350 people participating right now. Anshu, if we can fire the first poll. We have a set of audience questions. The first poll question is, you'll see it in a second, as soon as Anshu puts it on screen, is, will the COVID pandemic permanently change the way you live and work? Is this a temporary phase? Will everything snap back to normal? Or is this going to change your life permanently? You have 20 seconds to vote. So voting is open. Anshu, whenever time's up, you go share the poll results with us. Okay, you'll see the results in a second. All right, so 50% seats, yes, this will permanently change the way we live and work. 10% say no, and 39% say both yes and no. So obviously it's a complicated question with a complicated answer. All right, next question for you, Jacob. You work in what's called the creative manufacturing sector, what we commonly refer to as the craft industry or the handicraft industry. What role do you see for designers in helping rebuild this particular sector? How badly is it damaged, and what do we need to do?
Well, right now the sector is in dire straits because it has always been an underserved, underrepresented sector. Our attempts at calling it creative manufacturing is one of those attempts to make it more recognized. As far as role of designers go, I would say there are three things. One is what we did in the past as designers. And I would venture to say that we are complicit with business and politics in creating the mess that we find ourselves in. Mm-hmm. So designers are actually part of the problem. We have created the problem through methods of packaging, of profit before anything else. And we've actually, if anything, propagated what we call defuturing of the planet of human beings. So I think we have a lot to answer for. The second part is, what can we do now that we are in a crisis mode? And that's where, designers have the ability to work in emergent situations. And that's a special skill that we have. So we actually thrive in situations like this, where the ground rules are being changed. The goalpost is being shifted by the minute. So our ability to deal with situations which are dynamic, that is something that has to come to the fore right now. And again, thanks to our track record, perhaps we are not taken seriously enough. So we have to work very hard in making sure that we are heard. And when we are heard, we actually come up with actionable things, not blue sky ideas. The third part is what designers can do for the future. And I think this is a huge opportunity. So that poll is a little worrying for me, because I expect that a good number of the people in the poll were designers. Mm-hmm. And if designers, only 50% of designers think that we could slip back into what was there before the crisis, then that doesn't speak too well for our future as humanity.
Okay, strong words once again. Defuturing the planet is my takeaway from what Jacob said. On that note, the next question for Ashwini. Ashwini, are companies going to see the role of design differently? Will CSR spending patterns permanently change after this?
Yeah, I think CSR is a very, very powerful tool that corporates have had for a long time. But I have always seen all the CSR projects going towards almost like a charitable cause. Mm-hmm. So most corporates would look at us and them. So it would be like a sympathy, or they don't have something, so we can provide something. I think that sort of way of looking at the underserved, them and us, is going to change permanently. Because honestly now everybody who was saying us and them is underserved. So for the first time, I think everybody within the corporates is experiencing what is being underserved. I think all of us are underserved. So, I mean, yes, if we don't get our Wi-Fi properly, we feel underserved. So that's the degree of underserved we are tolerant with. And now today it's very different, right? So I think from sympathy to empathy is a big jump that most corporates should be doing from now on. And I'm just hoping that none of these projects moving forward will be like charitable causes. They'll actually make some real difference. I heard something very interesting the other day that, when we all prepare for the future, uh, there are a whole lot of probabilities, and we try and prepare for what seems most probable. And strangely, right now, what we are living through is something that was not really considered most probable. So we have not been prepared for it. So I think maybe even some of the CSR efforts or any other efforts would be towards something that is not highly probable, but probable all the same. And how do we build solutions for those? So the moment solutions word comes in, I think designers have a role to play. And similarly, I think designers, though they believe they've always had empathy, uh, probably they have also not had the degree of empathy that they may have now onwards. So I think everything will change.
You saw the poll results just now about whether COVID will permanently change a way of life for us, and you saw the design community respond. How do you think the corporate community is going to respond to this, Ashwini? Will life change permanently for them, or will it go back to business as normal?
I'm assuming and hoping that not just corporates, for all of us, life is going to change. And if we are in denial, I think then nobody can help us.
Sonia, Jacob said in one of the 3 points that he made that designers are not taken seriously enough by corporates, for instance, or by governments, for instance. Now, this pandemic and the lockdown, does this present a sudden opportunity for designers to become strategic partners? Will corporates reach out and say, okay, we've tried everything. Can you help us solve this problem? You need to unmute yourself, Sonia, if you can hear.
Yeah. So designers have been and are strategic partners. So we have to stop assuming that one day they will be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a role we put ourselves in, and we have to define that role. So that visual in modern times with Charlie Chaplin, where he's been swallowed by the machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the moment that most corporates are in. They're like stuck in this machine, which is a machine of their own making. And it makes them very vulnerable. They don't know what to do because they're in the middle of that machine. That's where now is our opportunity to actually step back, to help them make sense of these shifts. Things have changed. They're never coming back. So as designers, first of all, we have to accept that things are never coming back to normal, right? And we have to be the ones helping them make sense of the shifts that are going on. These are gales of creative destruction that are going to change every industry, but adversity is the time for creativity. And that's the moment we are in. So we can start with, just the fundamentals of design research, understand the shifts very quickly. For instance, I've done a piece around now, after, later, and it was just a reflective piece, and it's getting a lot of feedback from different people. It's just, let's move forward and reflect on, don't know when is after, when is later, but let's at least start thinking forward. Let's not be rigid and stuck in the middle of that machine. As designers, we have the flexibility. And when we do that, we can then after we do that research bit, we can help them help with fundamentals like reconnect. Go back, reconnect with your consumers. Don't be so caught up with yourself. And this is the time for truth. We have a funny statement in Spread. We say TITS, which is think it through, stupid. And so, and now from a corporate perspective, I'd say now corporates have to say the truth is. Over communicate, talk to your customer, tell him the truth is this. This is what's happening. Tell your employees what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
Because now's the time to drop all that jargon. You're not in your fancy suit. We've got to come back to the basis. It's a time for truth. And that's where we can play a role. We can now finally say, we've got a voice and we can help with this. We can help reimagine tomorrow. There's always an opportunity around every problem. We can always help reimagine what's next. And that's the role we need to play, because you can't do that. You can't renew, you can't regrow. unless you can't regenerate, unless you start to reimagine at this very moment, taking off from here and not remain stuck in that moment.
All right. Let me end this segment of the discussion with my last question to Biju, who's smiling curiously at the four designers surrounding him.
Yeah.
Biju, you've held various corporate leadership roles at Titan, at Reliance Retail, at Lifestyle, and now as a venture capitalist. Simply put, why don't corporates take design seriously? I know you do, so don't answer for yourself. I know you take design seriously. Why don't corporates take design seriously enough?
See, I think when you look at it today, design and designers are a part of what you might define as a solutions engineering group. When you talk about solutions engineering, you're talking about technology, you're talking about usability, you're talking about design, and you're talking about inculcating this as a habit. So what tends to happen is that for long, designers have always been seen as those who will either be in product design or graphic design, but never part of the larger solution, with a few exceptions. So I think what we'll need is that when you look at the time ahead, and come maybe September, and then beyond it, what you will begin to see is that companies will be desperate in terms of growth, because the market would have dropped in terms of customer inflows. The revenues would have come down, and companies will be looking for newer and newer ways of being able to get out of the rut that they are in. And when they have to do that, they have to turn around and do something which is going to be dramatically different from what they've done in the past. Let's take one particular category, say, like, let's say, for example, the apparel category. The apparel category for too long has been stuck in this old mold of two seasons, which is the autumn winter season, the spring summer collection. And what tends to happen is that they have a standard lead time, which is anywhere from 3 months to 8 months, depending on the company. And there is a process that they follow to be able to come into that season. Now, as far as I can remember, for the last 30 or 40 years, this process has not changed. But what will happen in situations such as this is that, as Sonia was mentioning, when you're desperate and driven to the wall, you will start looking for newer and newer ways of doing the things you've done in the past. And that's where, for example, specialities and functions such as design can come and wade in and become part of the larger solution, rather than merely being a support function. And so I kind of echo what Sonia is saying, which is that unless you get mainstream, unless you've begun to see as part of the solution, unless you're able to come in, and one of the things which is happening today is the fact that the use of digital technologies and and this entire episode is actually going to catalyze use of digital technologies. That's going to actually gallop. And if that happens, how is it that we can get design to be able to incorporate digital technologies in terms of solutions, which can then be presented to companies as being an effective way of being able to getting them out of the rut that they're in? So it's a much larger objective that they need to serve.
Jacob, Biju used the word larger solution 3 times in his answer. My question to you is, what is the larger problem? He said graphic design okay, apparel design okay, product design okay. You guys are solution engineers or solution designers in those areas, but you're not part of the larger solution. In your view, what is the larger problem that we are not part of?
How did we get here in the first place? And what do we have to do to get out of here? I can just bring this in relationship to the craft sector, because I think there are lessons to be taken out from the craft sector. So if you look at, just building on that earlier thread that I talked about, defuturing of human society. When you look at the craft sector is able to, it has a much lower capital to employment ratio than any other sector. The amount of capital investment that you have to do to create employment is very low. Probably has the lowest energy footprint, maybe second to agriculture. Primary farming, because their sunlight and nature does most of the work. There's a lot of use of local natural materials. Often these materials sequester more carbon than it releases. So if you actually look at it, this is one sector which is sort of naturally regenerating. By it's intrinsically regenerating. It puts out, it holds back most of the bad stuff and puts out more of the good stuff, if you were to call it that. It stabilizes incomes. It sort of reduces migration. And right now, if you see what India has gone through, is this horrendous
migration nightmare.
Migration. Now, if jobs could be created where people live, instead of taking people to where the jobs live, it sort of needs flipping. So when you talk about larger solutions, I believe this is one of the larger solutions. Some years ago, there was a conference organized by the European Union, where the ending statement was that the future is handmade. And I endorse that statement. The other thing is that if you look at production, the workforce, it's largely women. And when you know what happens when women work, when women earn, society develops, families develop. And there is something about this sector that sort of connects human beings to their humanity. So when you see something handmade, it's very difficult to fall in love with your iPhone. But it's a lot easier to fall in love, let's say, with a rock that that you can hold properly, or a handcrafted object. So there's something about this, the imperfection, the amount of skill and feeling that has gone into the object. And I think it will lead to people wanting to own less things rather than more things.
All right.
And this is another fundamental shift that has to happen. We are in a crazily consumerist society. We end up buying crap that we don't want. And a lot of people spend a lot of time convincing us to buy the crap, right? So if you look at what energies are being directed at, it is not to very good use.
Right.
And I think this is something that connects us back.
All right, scathing indictment of the entire capitalist world from Jacob. It's time for our second poll. Anshu, if we can fire the second poll. The question is, do you see design playing a key role in the economic resurgence? That's what this discussion is all about. You have three options: yes, no, and the third answer is yes, but only with serious changes in government policy. You have 20 seconds to vote. Your time starts now. Yeah, we'll get the results in just a second. There you go. All right, so quite an optimistic result for the poll. Design, 54% says that design is going to play a key role in the resurgence. 7% says no, and 39% says yes, but with a caveat. All right, this brings us to the second part of our discussion, which is called design and the policy response. Let's start with Sonia. Sonia, what kind of response would you like to see from the government?
So I'll ask you, building on your last question, that this whole, are we part of, or is design a part of change, the larger change that we wish to see? We step out and our cities look bombed. I mean, when I drive out in Bangalore now, it looks bombed. It's like, something bad happened here. Look at the state of the cities. So are we part of change? Whereas actually, now's a moment, and it's never happened before, where everyone's come together and everybody's listening. You have the ears of the nation. We've always had freedom without responsibility in our country. For once, we are taking some responsibility. At least we're not going out, at least we're not interacting, and we've learned to respond. How can we use this moment well? And when every sphere is changing, our social space is changing, our workspace is changing, the larger the city, state, everything's changing, right? So in this moment, very quickly, if we can get the government to use design as a resource. We don't need any great policies here. We just need to start using design as a resource at every level. It's like the sugar you need to make things sweeter right now. And because we can help respond, so be it design for behavior change. If we need certain behaviors changed, in all of those areas, design can come in and actually be a great enabler of that response, and to be able to change things around. And that's the way across sectors. The education sector needs radical change. All our children are studying from home. What will happen to that? How will that change very quickly? So I can't see any level where, be it the health sector, the IT sector, where we don't need design. If we have moments like this where we are interacting, how can we interact better? How can the human experience be better?
Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt you. What do you think the government should do to enable design to bring about these?
You've got vehicles like the India Design Council. You've got vehicles like your Design for India at the NASSCOM level. Use these vehicles. The UN is asking for designers to respond. Let's get designers to respond at every level and bring about change across every sector. It goes back to reimagining. It goes back to being able to, reframe everything right now, and we can play that role to actually be able to do design for change. Change is required at this moment, and that's the role design can play. And that's all they need to do is bring it up through competitions, through these various vehicles, engage the talent that is already available in the country to bring about change at every level.
Jacob, you at Industry have launched an initiative called Business Not As Usual. What is this? What does this mean for your craft and creative manufacturing community?
Yeah, again, it comes to this, the first poll. Will things change drastically after COVID, or will we go back to life as usual? Our response to COVID was to launch what we call a 3L kind of movement. The first one was lives. Lives. How do you save lives? How do you stay alive? And how do you protect yourself and your community? So we organized all our artisans, the ones who work with us, into call circles that we touch once a day. Every day there's somebody who calls everybody within our group. Right now it's about 600 people in rural Tamil Nadu. What's very interesting is that during these call circles, what we are finding is that when women are given agency and empowerment in a sense, they start looking out for other people. So while we have not received too many calls saying that, look, I don't have food or something, they're saying that there are other people in my locality who don't have food. Is there a way that we can help them? I think when you get into this kind of, handmade, more intimate kind of economies, we create a sort of a kinder paradigm of economic development. Okay? The other thing that we've been looking at is what we call livelihoods. How do you continue to earn here? We have a small work group in Ethiopia that is currently making masks for the local government and the local community there. All the people who are working in the unit have volunteered to work there. Yeah? If they sat at home, they would earn almost as much. There's a small incentive for them to come to work. A few days ago, the president of the region visited the unit because he heard about this, and he came to see who are these people who are doing this. So I think when you have these empowered creative manufacturing sort of units, some kind of magic does happen. Now, the third L is what we call life after COVID-19. And that is where we say we cannot go back to business as usual. This is an opportunity to change the basic capitalist economic paradigm. And where we're saying we still remain capitalist. It is about being economically sustainable, but economically sustainable, having lives with purpose, meaning, and connection to one another. And we can see this happening almost every day, because especially when you have a crisis like this, it can bring out the worst behavior in people, but it also brings out the best behavior in people. And we are seeing that a lot of good behavior is sort of surfacing here. So for us, the imperative is that we can't go back to where we were before this crisis. This very fact that everybody is touched every day, we are getting an outpouring of actually design solutions from the artisans. So we've had about 5 or 6 things from artisans and artisans' children on how to make masks at home, for example. They've been sending us little videos and even a PPT. We got a PPT from the child of one of the artisans, how to make a mask at home. Yeah.
Ashwini, you're working with Startups Against COVID and the government of Maharashtra. What has your experience been working with the startup community and the government?
Yeah, so before that, I just want to go back to the poll.
Okay.
Because I think the poll was answered by designers.
Okay.
But what if it was to be answered by doctors or marketeers or financiers, or I don't know what would be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think let's not be sort of in this bubble that designers are going to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
We have to work together with so many other kinds of people with so many other expertise that they bring in. That I think it will be a myth to say that yes, designers can change everything and improve everything and so on. So I have a basic discomfort with so many designers feeling that we can do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first thing. Second thing is, there was this Twitter meme that was doing the rounds some time back. Flight attendant says, "Is there a doctor on board?" And dad says, "Not asking for designers, are they?" So yeah, I mean, we are designers. Let's just remember how much we can do and what we can do, and let's do that. And I think if we try and go beyond that, it sort of serves nobody nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to this space that we found ourselves in, the first thing we did the moment this crisis happened and the lockdown happened and we moved home and started working from home, is to reach out all our networks and sort of opened ourselves out and said that we are here if you're doing anything in this space, in the space of helping this situation, and you think design intervention can help, we are open. So just reach out. So that's the first thing we did the day we started working from home. And sure enough, within 24 hours, we were approached by somebody who was coordinating a set of group of entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, who were establishing a platform for telemedicine. And interestingly, this telemedicine has just got legal because of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment that happened, this group sort of put up the platform, a very robust one, and they were piloting it already in Karnataka and Punjab. And they said, we want to do it for Maharashtra, and can you help us create something with this? Because we need to go to the government and say, this is what we are doing. So I think almost overnight we created, we call it COVID Madat, because we wanted it to be as simple and basic and accessible and ready as possible. And we created a lot of communication. The first level of communication had to be to doctors to say, come join this platform and be the volunteers, because telemedicine will work only if you have enough doctors. The second level, of course, was to reach out to people and say that, there is a few doctors, in that case, thousands of doctors already have, by the way, volunteered, that doctors are available, waiting on call, and you could just reach out to them and ask whatever it is that you want to ask. And medicine online is legal now, so just go ahead and use that. Third thing had to be to tell doctors what is the SOP. And then fourth thing, of course, was to go to the government and say, this is what has been created, and we need your support, or we need you to endorse it, because you need it. As a government, you need to launch it. So all of this was a highly collaborative effort, and it was not just the startups, but there were doctors involved, and there were investors involved, and there was Elephant team. And we sort of worked seamlessly. Almost within, I think, 48 hours, we could approach the state government. And one little interesting anecdote, our chief minister in Maharashtra is an art school graduate. So he knows his fonts.
Oh, that's good.
So anyways, I mean, that's just aside. But yeah, that's how it happened. And he's fairly proactive. So he actually adopted it. And several government agencies adopted it. And it's sort of promoted all over. And I think more than 20,000 doctors have signed up. And yeah, so it goes. So I think this is exactly the role of design, to sort of come together among many and, plug a piece that we are really good at. I think that's what I would always like to look at. What is the piece that we can plug? I think you don't have to always do the whole universe.
That is the perfect segue for our next poll. Anshu, if we can have poll number 3. Just a second. Right, here's a poll. Members in the audience, you're welcome to respond. Has the COVID pandemic changed the way you see design and its role in society? Taking off from what Ashwini said. Yes, it has. No, it hasn't. And of course, the third option is it's complicated. 20 seconds. You know the drill. Vote away. Okay, Ashwini, overwhelming 59% agrees with you that the pandemic has changed the way they see design in society. 15% says no, and 26%, as you can see, says it's complicated. Which brings us to Biju. Biju, there are clearly environmental benefits to shutting down the world, business, and traffic for a few weeks. We're getting stories of birds chirping and dolphins reappearing in the Bombay seas, which I'm fairly certain are fake videos. And air quality index improving in Delhi and Noida. Lots of benefits. Do you think business would use this as an opportunity to appeal to what, and I take this from Jacob, to what is called the Greta Thunberg generation, that business can be responsible as well in helping the environment clean itself up?
So I think even for business to be responsible, they should begin to start seeing this as a value that consumers hold dear to them. And what you're beginning to see today is that there is a dawning realization amongst people that you could obviously do with a lot less than you've been used to in the past. That you can actually, a lot of the stuff that you otherwise were spending your money on in terms of discretionary income is stuff that is completely useless and not part of your requirement. And in several ways, what is also beginning to happen is this will finally permeate in terms of consumer behavior over a period of time. And if that becomes a strong enough trend, then companies will start recognizing this as a point of difference and then look for ways and means in which they can actually incorporate that into their communication, whether it be brand or corporate, and then see how they can make a difference to the people. And also, kind of anchor upon a larger trend that might be, relevant at that point of time. Just going back to what Ashwini said, I just wanted to share one example. Being a product of management school, and like us, like me, there were several others who are all alumni of several management schools in Bangalore. And when we first started off when the lockdown happened and we were all confined to our homes, we suddenly realized that, we've got a lot more time and we're not running around chasing our tails. And if you were to really compartmentalize your life in terms of what is important, what is not important, then you actually have a lot of spare time. And we said, what do we do with our spare time? And we said that, let's try and figure out if we can be a part of the solution. And we identified two very vulnerable segments. One is the migrant labor, and the second is the urban poor. And we said, is there a way in which we can try and assist the migrant labor and the urban poor? And we debated two options. We said either provide them food or we actually provide them rations. And since a lot of us have got investments in food companies and restaurants, etc., we said that the kitchens are anyway closed, and there is a good way for them to be able to make sure that they can produce food out of the kitchens and we can distribute it. But then we realized that in the long run, that's going to be a bit difficult because you've got to provide at least 2 meals a day, lunch and dinner. And in many of these homes, there are small children, and it's very difficult for them to be just living on a lunch and dinner because they also need some things in between. So we said it's better to look at it from a dry rations principle. And long story short, we kind of set out on a campaign to be able to raise money. And I can tell you the role that the communications designer and the graphics designer played in terms of being able to get this message out digitally to a large group of people and encourage them to actually donate to a cause which they didn't even know about, but they were only being confident about the fact that it's being run by a bunch of people, and hopefully it will have certain ethics and values and will not actually, be a profiteering exercise. And we managed to raise initially from, a lot of people and close to about 60 lakhs. And then, of course, a few foundations hearing about it came on, and then they decided to support it. And then, of course, and we started off with a very let's say what we thought was an ambitious target of 1,000 families to whom we could distribute per day, but it's now currently ticking at about between 2.5 to 3,000, depending on how we are able to do 3,000 families per day, which is roughly about 12 to 15,000 individuals who are benefiting from this. Now, if you ask me, am I in the NGO space? No. Am I somebody who's done this before? No. I mean, this group of people who are there in trying to do this, are they in this space? No. All that they've done is that they've looked at NGOs who've been at the forefront of doing this in terms of raising money and who are working with these segments of society. And they've also looked at NGOs who work very closely because you also have to ensure distribution is done the right way and it doesn't finally go into the wrong hands. So all that you've done is knit together an ecosystem. And what we have seen in that whole ecosystem is that the first responders and the most enthusiastic, the ones who are actually cutting open 50-kilo bags of rice and repacking that into smaller 10-kilo bags of rice, are actually the millennials. Because they are saying that, while some of us are working from home, I don't mind working double hours. I'll spend time here doing this in the distribution center and then go back and do my day job at night. And that's the way they have. So what is it that brought them? It's not that they don't have anything else to do, but there is something that they have seen and they wanted to actually contribute in some manner. So, when you really look at it, this entire episode will give every individual and consequently every company the opportunity to be able to reflect on what's important and what's not important, what is valuable and what is not so valuable, what is it that we need to be focusing on and what shouldn't we focus on, what are the bad habits of the past that we need to shed, and what are some new things that we have to adopt. Now, that is when companies also start beginning to see things. So if it is unsustainable, how do you make it sustainable? If it is non-eco-friendly, how do you make it eco-friendly? If it is a process which is going to create less carbon waste, how do you adopt that as opposed to something else? If there is a better way of getting from point A to point B, then with a lesser carbon footprint, can we do that? So those are some of the changes that you should expect to see. And when I look at designers, what I'm seeing from them is an opportunity to be able to enable this. Because stuff like this is actually, one part of it is talking about it. The second is to be able to communicate this. The third part of it is to be able to do it sustainably for a long period of time. And that is when behaviors change. And for behaviors to change, designers have a very, very important role to play. Which is why when I see that there are some 39% who mentioned that the government has a role to play, I think pretty much the government has no role to play, frankly, if you ask me. I think as a community, we have a larger role to play, and we shouldn't look for the government shoulders to fire anything from. We should try and do it ourselves.
All right. Ashwini, lots of young designers tuning into this webinar. For a young designer who's interested in participating in the process of this social change that Jacob spoke about, that Sonia spoke about, what's a good starting point? Ashwini, you need to unmute yourself.
Firstly, I think it's very heartening to see that almost all the young designers want to do good, and they are quite focused on trying to do something which is more important and for the world and for good. But what happens when you are in that space is you don't know where to begin, and the world is full of huge problems. I mean, there is every kind of problem that design actually potentially can solve. So where do you begin? So I just want to go back to something that I underwent few years ago. I think in 2008, I was a participant in a workshop which was held by Rockefeller Foundation for Design for Social Impact. And the foundation believed that designers actually can play a very, very large role. But why is it that not many designers are doing that? And that's really what the workshop was for. And all of us spent a week, 20 of us from around the world spent a week there thinking, what is it that we could potentially be doing where design for social impact is a real term and it's not just a lip service. So I came back with 3 pledges, and I think that's something I would urge most young designers or any designer who really wants to start anything in social impact to start doing something that suits them. And I'm just going to tell you quickly my 3 pledges that I came back with. First one was it's okay to start at the backyard. No problem is really small for solving. Everything that is worth solving is worth solving. So don't wait for solving world hunger or world oil spills or that size of a problem. It's okay to solve a really small problem and sort of sharpen your pencil to understand how design intervention can solve a problem. Simple example, I mean, as an office located in an area called Baudhan, we actually help Baudhan Nagrik Manch to spread the word of segregating wet and dry waste. And that's a really small problem, but design can solve it, and why not solve it? So that's the first one. So start in your backyard. It's all right to start with a small problem, but just begin. See where design intervention can lead. The second one is in any large corporate project, it's interesting to find ways to piggyback on that project and find ways to create a positive social impact. Because I don't think intrinsically any corporate would refuse doing good. So if you have a good idea and if you have a project where it can be supported, just propose it. So anything that you do commercially, keep looking for opportunities to do good and propose them. And the third one is that we will always do our social impact through our core competency. Now, what do I mean by that? I just gave an example of communication design that we created for COVID Madad, because communication design happens to be the core competency. Now, my core competency is not in, let's say, donating or collecting money. It is not in processions. It is not in, all those activisms. But core competency is design. So try and solve anything that you're trying to do on social impact using your own core competency, because that is likely to have the maximum impact. So if it's impact that you are after, then use your core competency. So that's just my three
Three good
bits.
points. Time for our next poll. Anshu, if we can fire the next poll. This is poll number 4. Okay, members in the audience who are watching, how long will it take to bring the Indian economy back to reasonably good health or to full health? 6 to 12 months, 1 to 3 years, more than 3 years. How optimistic or pessimistic are we? 20 seconds. All right, reasonably optimistic. So we have 64% says 1 to 3 years we'll restore India back to the Indian economy back to full health. I don't know what that full health means. It may not be the kind of economy that Jacob is talking about, a kind of paradigm of economic growth. It might be the harsher, ruder paradigm of economic growth that we're in. Biju, would you agree with that finding, 1 to 3 years?
Well, it depends again, as you said, about full health. What I'm, if you were to look at this period, which is say December, January, February, as the 3 months preceding the lockdown starting in March, clearly that wasn't an economy in full health. That was an economy which is at subpar performance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to talk about an economy in full health, you've got to be talking about an economy which is notching up between 7 to 8 to 8.5% in terms of continuing growth for about 4 quarters in a row. To call it to be in good health, and India, which is at full health, as opposed to the 4.5 to 5% that we were struggling with in the previous quarter. So if you were to look at the time, which is 1 to 3 years, I certainly agree with it. That is, it is going to be between 1 to 3 years because of a variety of reasons. One, my own belief is that the pandemic's health impact on the domestic economy will probably be lesser than what you've seen it in several countries like Europe and in the US. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that we don't really have too much of wiggle room in this economy. We don't have the cash reserves that many of the other countries have in order to be able to start giving out monies to people. So if we had the cash reserve, I would have assumed that it would be closer to a year. Because we don't have the cash reserve, what will happen is that we will end up with this trickle-down effect where everybody will slowly start giving a little bit of money to people, and then in a sense, it will just grow marginally month upon month, which is why it will take a lot longer to happen. The third is we don't have companies which are of that size. Even our largest Indian companies, whether private or government, typically don't have a very well capitalized structure. So it's not that they can sit out and say that I will burn cash for a period of, let's say, 3 to 6 months while I ensure that everybody will be protected. So since we don't have companies and a lot of our industry is in the small and medium sector, what you're also likely to see is that there will be some economic impact of this on the workforce. So that you will find people losing jobs, and if people start losing jobs and if unemployment increases, then the load of the government will increase. So there are several of these factors which I think which will push India closer to the 2 to 3 year mark rather than bring it further up to the 1 to 2 year mark. So I have a feeling that it's going to be a bit of a struggle for us, and there isn't too much that we can do beyond actually grin and bear it, as you might say.
Sonia, you run a sort of design kibbutz, if I may use that word, a sort of design collective. You grow your own vegetables, you have your own community. in that sense, you've been preparing for this pandemic for quite a while now, right? Creating a self-sustaining environment. Do you see more designers and more businesses sort of creating these bubbles, these self-sustaining ecosystems?
I think if you look at all of us and the way we've been shifting our lives, we knew that the current where we're going is not sustainable. But the forces in power, would they listen to us? Would our point of view be accepted? We weren't really so sure of that. So I think a moment has come where a lot more of this will be accepted. We will start thinking a lot more about collective futures, and we need more such communities. For instance, look at what Biju was talking about. He's not really in the space of making food and distributing it, but he's doing it now. We need to sort of create this collective future, and we need to come together for that. And more so now, because with all of this social distance and other such sort of a fear mindset that's come into us, there's going to be social distress, there's going to be social distrust, and we need to build back social trust. The social networks are just going to be something which is out there, but it's not going to have any real meaning. So building that social trust is important, which needs a lot of imagination. It needs a lot of give and take. In our work, we are seeing, and having a community where people can give and take. So more than the physical space, what we have is a collective, and in that collective there is give and take. I can do something for someone, and there can be a promissory note. That's more than enough. In that sense, I would say what I've learned from there, and what I've learned, at least in my many years of design experiences, we are far more powerful than we assume. Design is a very powerful catalyst. And if at this moment we don't recognize it, we will be doing the design profession ourselves a disservice. Again, I'm going to go back to somebody from industry, Biju, who's right here. He said, from creating communication to creating ecosystems. Look at how wide that is.
Mm-hmm.
That's a space where we can catalyze.
Mm-hmm.
And we ourselves, we have this sort of a reflection format which studies emergence, which is called Design Open. And we did a Design Open in Hyderabad at the Hyderabad Design Week. We had a Design Open in Kochi. And we found that at one level there were design strategists, leaders who were coming there. At another level, the next generation was coming. And they wanted to hear about this bigger impact that design can have. And we didn't learn it. I didn't learn design strategy, although I'm getting ready to teach it now. But we learned it by just doing things. We opened huge stores. We went and designed the metro stations in Rio. That's how you learn it. At this moment, designers just have to say, yes, I'm available. Reach out to me. I don't want the money. It'll come. I'm building my brand. I'm demonstrating what design can do. And so therefore, we created a space to be able to do that, a shared space to be able to create shared dreams, and for designers to be able to think much, much bigger than we allow ourselves to.
Jacob, is this pandemic going to change the way design is taught in design schools?
It already has.
Okay.
Because we've been running Shrishti now for 2 months.
Other than the obvious running Shrishti on Zoom and running on video conferencing tools.
I think there are two things that seem to be emerging. One is that everybody talks about flipped classrooms and does very little about it. I think not even in 2 weeks, I think in 1 week we were running flipped classrooms because it was more efficient. The other thing that happened, at least personally, is that in a class you talk a lot, in a face-to-face class, because you're constantly having feedback, you can talk till the cows come home, right? Now, in this kind of situation, you, as an instructor, you are brief and to the point, and you actually hand over the flow to the students. So I think there is a sort of a flip, not just the flip classroom, but the role that the instructor plays and the role that the participants play are being flipped as it should be. I am very curious to see what this does to the cost of education. Yeah. So I run a few programs where, let's say I want artisans' children to come and study. The cost of the program is about 10 lakhs in fees. But if you factor in staying costs, it's 15, 20 lakhs, which no artisans can afford for a 3-year course. Now, with stuff going digital and finding ways in which to teach digitally, everything is getting sort of shrunk in terms of size. So bite-sized pieces of information. So we are actually experimenting with education for adult learners, where the length of the instruction is 2 minutes, because we have to convey this on mobile phone and very often on feature phones with only IVR functions. Mm-hmm. Now, this is on education broadly, but I'm really curious to see how this is going to change design education. And I can see cost, and I can see this entire flipping where the students are in control and not the teachers.
All right, which brings us to our final poll of the day. Anshu, if you can fire poll number 5. Okay, what has been the biggest benefit to you personally for the lockdown? I learned to cook. That's my biggest benefit. So learn to run my own house, learn to spend time with your family, had time to reflect upon your life, and afternoon naps every day. I think about 5 seconds left. All right, a deeply philosophical bunch in the audience today. Overwhelming 57% says, had time to reflect upon my life. Very few people are taking afternoon naps. Good thing. Learn to run my own house. Either everybody knows how to cook and clean their house, or they haven't bothered, or spend time with my family is 21%. So learn to had time to reflect upon my own life. Let me go to the final question before we open it to the audience. Biju, what has been the biggest learning for you personally from this lockdown?
The biggest learning for me has been to learn to run my house.
Okay.
We take for granted many things when the house is running, but when you have to run it yourself, you realize that there are several moving levers. Mm-hmm. Having run a retail business, I thought supply chains were complex until I came into the kitchen and discovered how much more complex it can actually be. Even, compounded by the fact that, between breakfast, lunch, and dinner, between one day and the next, there has to be variety or people get bored. Okay. So that is how complex the supply chain can be. We have a gardener who normally comes in and waters the garden and, plants, transplants, etc. And when you have to do it yourself, you realize that that's a completely different ecosystem which you take for granted. Because it's not just about watering. You've got to be able to recognize signs. You've got to figure out when to weed. You've got to figure out when to groom, all kinds of things. And it is almost another living ecosystem, which it is actually, but we've never paid heed to that. That's the other part of it. All of us, drop things around the house when you move, but when we have to clean it ourselves, you realize how we can live more responsibly and make sure that we actually learn to clean after anything that we do, such that, the house gets less challenges in terms of maintaining. So for me, I think, between all of this, learning how to run a house, plus my kids who were in the US, I managed to get them back here before, the US closed down. So we all got time to spend with each other and be able to reflect on various things, which was not an opportunity to get in a normal working day.
All right, it's time to take a few questions. I'm going to take a couple of questions. The first question, I think, is for Jacob. Adam asks Jacob, how can designers use the principle of a sharing economy to create an alternative to the forever expansionist economic model? Biju talked about returning to 8% growth, which is, to put it crudely, the forever expansionist economic model. So how can designers, we are a small force in this giant economic engine, how can we use the principles of a sharing economy?
I think to some extent, Adam has already answered his own question. Mm-hmm. But for shared economies to work, one is, what is the value that you're presenting to future users of the same product, right? You then certainly move from a use and discard way of design to something that is durable, it's got quality, and at some level captures the soul of the maker. Now, if you have something like that, if you're creating objects which are precious, then it's not just shared, but it's gifted. And I can see this linking back to the creative manufacturing sector and the craft sector in many ways. But I think that is something that you have to build in. Authenticity, the fairness in its making, and the value embedded in the product or the system that makes it worth passing forward.
All right, the next question I think is
so Jacob, just to add to it, I think in the book of Genesis in the Bible, Adam shared something with Eve, so it's part of the sharing economy, and after that it's history.
Second question for Biju comes from Upen Shenoy. Very practical question. Post-pandemic, what might change the most in consumer lifestyle and behavior? Post-pandemic, what might change the most in consumer lifestyle and behavior?
So education, work, travel, and eating out, I think, are going to be the four most important changes which are likely to happen. The way people study and learn, as Jacob was mentioning earlier, will change, and I think will change irreversibly. There are a lot of vested interests in the current system of education, but what we've seen over the last month or so, what we have witnessed is that without too much of a degradation in terms of the quality of education, you can pretty much change the way you study, and which then will make education cheaper, a lot more affordable, and a lot more available on the tap than what is available today. Similarly, in terms of work also, I'm on the board of a IT company which has got about 25,000 people, and work from home has actually been achieved with 99.4% of the staff. It is only 0.6% who've not been able to work from home. All the others have been able to work from home, which then leads you to think about, why do we ever need them to come to an office if they can work from home? Why do we need this armada of vehicles which are transferring them all the way from their homes to offices and bringing them back and clogging the roads and adding to the pollution that we have? What in case if each of them were to be told, you will get 3 hours extra every day when you work from home, but you have to take a 10% salary reduction for that? And will that make a big difference in terms of the entire business model which is there? So there are several thoughts like this which can actually come in. Video conferencing, as we see today, was not something that everybody considered as a default option. And if this becomes a default option where people across are collaborating even for live operatic performances, which require synchronicity of a very high order, then what is it for a communication program like this where you're having a discussion? So if that happens, then will it have an implication on aviation? Will it have an implication in terms of the hospitality industry? All of us have learned to eat in our own homes for so long. And you realize that you need to actually eat out? Or can we actually manage with less eating out and more eating in? So there are several of these factors which I think will cause people to reflect on what they've done in the past. And in many cases, if you don't learn from this, then obviously you've come out of this pandemic without a learning experience.
Sonia, next question for you comes from Mayuri Mohapatra. She says, corporates still consider design as an aesthetically driven function. That's true of a lot of corporates, not all of them, rather than a functional and problem-solving role. Is this likely to change post-COVID-19?
Only if we demonstrate value. If we can understand their pain points and actually demonstrate tangible value, and therefore I said there's no better time than now to demonstrate that, because we have that ability to actually make them look at, say, what are the assets you have within a company? Let's look at that. Sometimes you stop looking at that and you're looking more at the problems outside. And we help them leverage those assets, communicate in new ways, behave like a startup and not like a big machine. And maybe come up with these tiny projects, even if you're afraid to make big changes, tiny projects where you can see tangible change. So every organization is like an innovation factory, and they're coming up with these new ideas and they're experimenting with that, because we will need to do that. It is a whole new world. We did not imagine this, but we need to now contextualize what we're doing within this. So if we can actually demonstrate outcome, it may be in small ways and scale up from there. I think that is the biggest opportunity. I find, for instance, I find that my own team, I mean, working from home, we are far sharper and smarter. I don't know why.
Mhm.
You know, maybe we get too comfortable, we're too chatty, we're having too much fun, but we're sharper and smarter. So I'm sure all the young designers out there, they're so sharp and so smart. If you can say, hey, quickly, do you need to communicate out there? I can help you do it. Or you've got X problem, why don't we try this solution? And the same people who would, the elephants who would not be open to the change, would now be willing to be the bats, which is a hybrid animal, and fly upside down and do things in any which way. And we therefore just about can be the catalyst of that. The asking the what if question, which at this moment we need to ask.
All right. Bats may not be a good reference to use in the current scenario.
Yeah.
And okay, final question from the audience from Neha Thawali. This goes to Ashwini. What will be the most important skill sets for one to have in the post-COVID scenario as a designer?
I think over communication. I think how to over communicate is one of the skills that all of us have learned, and I think they are kind of pretty handy at this moment. So I think communication is the skill really to sharpen and make the most of. If all of us could not communicate the way we are right now, we did not know how to use the right expressions, the phrases, use the time well, I don't think we would be really making sense. So I think now it's more important than ever to learn to communicate, for designers especially, because a lot of time designers rely on what they have done rather than what they're thinking. So now is the time to think and communicate. The other thing that I have personally learned, and I think it makes sense to me now, is it's okay to have errors.
Mm-hmm.
Perfection can wait sometimes. Now is not the time to run after perfection and get that absolute final dot in place. Now is the time to make things work as they can at the best possibility. So
Okay.
yeah.
Both a skill set and a mindset shift.
Yeah.
Okay, this brings us almost to the end of this discussion. I'm going to ask Tanvi Nabar, our sketch artist who's been sketching through the entire discussion. Tanvi, if I can hand it over to you to share your sketches. And while Tanvi does that, I'm going to quickly summarize the key highlights according to me. We started off with Biju Kurian talking about health crisis leading to an economic catastrophe. And those are strong words to use, and it will take the economy 2 to 3 years to recover. Jacob spoke about defuturing the planet. That's something that we have done systematically over the years. I'm just repeating, Tanvi, if you can hear me, you can start sharing the sketches.
I need Ashu to help me share that.
All right, Anshu, can you help Tanvi share the sketches? Give her sharing rights. Right, we spoke about defuturing the planet. We spoke about adversity being a good time for creativity to come out. That sometimes in times of crisis is when design can play a more creative role, a larger role, a strategic role. We spoke about no problem being too small or too large. I think it was Ashwini that said, start in your backyard if you need to. Fix the pothole, fix the garbage dump, fix the broken gate in the backyard. Start from there and work your way up. Tanvi, we have you. Whenever you're ready, you can start screen sharing. Jacob Matthews spoke about a kind of paradigm of economic growth, which is far removed from the current paradigm that we have, which is a sort of winner-take-all mentality where the biggest economic and other gains go to the richest people. And I think Sonia spoke about building social trust, about how we need to rebuild trust again in the work-from-home world, in the new economy, in creating so-called design kibbutzes or self-sustaining bubbles that we're going to live in. Tanvi, whenever you're ready. So Tanvi Nabar of Lady Company is a sketch noter. And if you're ready with your sketches, you're looking a little panicked. Don't worry about it.
So sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to because it's not allowing me to do that. Just.
Are you on a tablet or a?
Yes, on a tablet.
Okay, all right. Tablet is a little tough. Laptop is a little easier.
So this is education in the solutions approach.
This is education under high pressure. While Tanvi is doing that, we have time for a few more audience questions. If I can. Okay, there you go. Okay, the screen is shared. There you go. Over communicate, dramatic change, intimate economies, buy less. CSR is going to change. Time for the truth. Why do our cities look bombed? Sonia asked. They look a little less bombed now, Sonia, with all the traffic off the roads. You can see beautiful photographs of every city being shared on Facebook and on WhatsApp.
No, you notice the bombing more now, actually.
Yeah, because there's no traffic and there's
No traffic.
birds and animals are taking over the roads again. Okay, George Supreet says, well done, Tanvi. You're getting a little fan mail on our chat screen.
Hi, George.
Okay, bite-sized classes. That's a point that Jacob brought up. How can the production process think about true value created in objects that are measured, as opposed to creating junk and selling people junk and they acquire more junk? Work, education, eating out will never be the same. And Sonia, I think, spoke about demonstrating outcome, not just talking about the outcome. Okay, I'm going to ask Michael Foley to switch on his video again. Michael, can you come back on screen with the rest of us?
Yeah.
All right, can we go back to a full screen? Tanvi, can you stop sharing?
Yeah.
Hi, Suresh.
Hi, hi. All right, it's time for our Zoom photo. Can everybody put on your best smile? So Anshu can take the photograph. Anshu, tell us when you're ready and we'll start posing.
Get set, go.
All right.
Cheese. Done.
Right, that brings us to the end of this conversation. Sonia Manchanda, Biju Kurian, Jacob Matthew, Michael Foley, and Ashwini Deshpande. Thank you for all your inputs. The video recording of this week's session will be available on the ADI YouTube channel by early next week. Our next webinar is on the 24th, Friday, the 24th of April. It's going to be on the impact of the lockdown on the design and craft sector. Registrations for that webinar will open on 21st of April. Right, that brings us to the end. Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you for a closing note.
Thank
Over
you,
to you, Michael.
Suresh.
Thanks, Suresh. I think just a quick, very, very short note on this. I think the ADI is now looking at reinventing itself. I mean, given the challenges that exist today, I think it's kind of brought in a lot of collaboration across the country and across the chapters. And we just want a lot more of this to happen. I think we are pushing to get designers to join and, join this entire community and try and create a larger impact. And if there are any interested individuals, entities, and organizations, we are all open to, joining ADI. So please look us up and join in. Thank you, everyone.